All right, so now we are recording. So hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Natalie, one of the Global Times ambassadors here at Cal State Fullerton. Go ahead, Sarah, if you want to introduce yourself really quick.
Hi, I'm Sarah Biser. I am currently a graduate intern at Cal State Fullerton in the Study Abroad and Global Engagement Global Titan Center, and I'm pursuing a master's degree in International Education Management at the Milbury Institute of International Studies at Monterey.
All right, so thank you for that. And with our lovely guests, we'd like to talk about more about study abroad experiences and Black History Month. And so, Adriana, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I am Adriana Smith. I am the travel strategist and CEO of travelpreneur.com, the digital platform empowering new travelers with the confidence to see the world so that they can make a local and global impact in the most cost-effective way. I was formerly the Assistant Director of International Programs at Presbyterian College, where I facilitated international experiences for both international and domestic students. So I have lots of experience on the back end in terms of facilitating programs and helping students study abroad myself twice as an undergraduate student and as a grad student abroad, both times in Spain. And it was an impactful experience that even today, as a 32-year-old, that I still look back to those experiences and they have showed up in many positive ways, but also I can look back to the negative moments and they have helped me become the person I am today.
Awesome, great lead in. I was going to ask you, what's inspired you to study abroad? Because it can be a scary experience and there can be many challenges, as you briefly mentioned.
So for me, it started out with wanting to learn a second language, and that's Spanish. I'm from Miami, Florida, and born and raised in Miami, so grew up around a lot of Spanish speakers, and just for that love of a language, it encouraged me to want to see more of the world. But it wasn't until like high school I was able to take Spanish, and then in college I was able to study abroad. So I had no clue about the world. I had no clue about learning a language in another country, a Spanish speaking country. And it wasn't until like a study abroad advisor came into my classroom and started talking about a program when I'm like, oh, that sounds amazing. And so it was there when my eyes opened up to study abroad. So even if you are in college and have never heard of study abroad before, it is okay. Now you're hearing about it now, and it's one of the most impactful experiences you can have while in college.
Great. Thank you so much for answering that. That's really helpful for our students to know about. Would you mind telling us a little bit about what kind of growth you saw from the start of your traveling up until today, especially since you've had so many experiences in travel and education abroad? And if you could just tell us a little bit about how it's helped you grow.
It has helped me become a much more humble person. On my first study abroad experience, I got lost. And that's, it's a scary thing for a first time student or person going abroad. And so you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So because I panicked, I immediately wanted to return home. But luckily that, I couldn't go back home because I didn't have the money, the funds to book another flight. So spending that time in Spain, really opening my eyes to a different culture, to different people, the traditions, etc. It allowed me to, again, become humble, but also appreciate where I was. Obviously I'm American. And so being in a different culture, I got to see the world, and it helped me lessen my pride, if you will, because I was very, very prideful. And it helped me to really open up my heart and open up my mind and be more flexible. One of the things I would tell my students is that it helps you get those soft skills that you would need when you go to work or you're in groups where diverse groups of people. Like it helps you really develop your soft skills. And for me, that's the growth I saw: the soft skills, the flexibility, the adaptability, the ability to problem solve in cases like me getting lost in a brand new city and having to navigate that space when I didn't know the local language as well as I thought I did, but also to get to the point where I was comfortable being uncomfortable. So that was a big step for me. And I'm glad I did it, because if I hadn't, I don't think I would have been as open-minded as I am now, or at least open-hearted when it comes to other cultures, other people, and the world. Because I honestly thought that Miami, where I'm from, was the center of the world. And of course, if you hear that statement, you're like, what? but that's what I really thought. And so being in Spain and studying abroad really helped me move away from that mindset and that mind frame. And so now when I look back to those experiences, I see the little bits and pieces that my study abroad experience have helped me to grow, not only professionally and academically, but also personally.
Awesome. I couldn't have said it better. And I love that you said being comfortable with the uncomfortable, because that's so apparent in a lot of people's trips, especially mine. I was so uncomfortable when I went to China, even though I'm part Chinese. So it was a very unique and challenging experience. But you mentioned getting lost as one of your challenges in the beginning. What other challenges did you face and how did you overcome them?
So one of the biggest challenges, and I know students always ask this question when they study abroad, is like, I don't know the language. What am I going to do? And so for me was getting over the hurdle, and I guess the fear of practicing a language in the culture in the country. So for me, I had to get comfortable with using what I knew about Spanish with the locals at grocery stores if I'm purchasing something, because that was the only way I was going to actually learn. Like I couldn't hide behind a book. I couldn't hide in my room because I was there to experience, to actually immerse. So the language barrier was one of my biggest challenges. Like when I got lost, I was trying to speak to this elderly man and I was trying to ask him like, where is this building? And I could not even form the sentence. And like, I knew it if I was in a classroom setting, but like actually the use, the pragmatics, I'm like, I couldn't even form it, at least not grammatically correct. And so for me, once I got over that hurdle and once I started engaging more in the local community and started traveling on my own a bit more, it became easier. And definitely when I went back abroad to Spain to get my master's degree, I was having full-on conversations with people in a grocery store, in restaurants, et cetera. Like that's how comfortable I became, because if you are seeking to learn a language, like you have to put yourself out there, because one of the most fabulous things I can think of being a language learner, but also an instructor on the opposite side, is that you remember much better than if you were in a classroom trying to memorize how to say something. And so I would always remember if someone corrected me, that the next time I would say it correctly, because again, that person told me in that moment, and it's just much more memorable because of that interaction. So that was one challenge, the language barrier, but also homesickness and culture shock was definitely others that challenged me. It was my first time out of the state of Florida. So I went to college at University of Florida, and it was my first time out of the country, but also out of the state. So it was a lot of firsts for me. And so I was homesick. I didn't realize I was homesick until my roommate in the host family brought it up to me. She's like, "You seem homesick." I'm like, "Yeah, I've never been this far away from home." And so once she brought that to my attention, I realized, oh, okay, I'm just stuck in my little comfort zone. I wouldn't go out with my peers. I wouldn't do anything that was out of my comfort zone. I would go to school and I would come back to my host family's home, and I would just like do what Adriana would do in her dorm room. But when she said that, I'm like, oh, so I started venturing out a bit more. And it's all because of homesickness, right? And also culture shock. Like it was my first time out of the US. So I had to get comfortable learning something different than what my mind said was true or, existed. So those are some of the main challenges I had, but I think I needed that like a wake up call, because again, like I said, like I wouldn't be the person that's sitting in front of your screens right now.
Wow, thank you. That's really insightful. And just to go off of what you're saying about stepping outside your comfort zone and talking about fears, can you tell us what tips or advice you would tell the students who are afraid of studying abroad?
I would say I would hear often when people say, "What do you tell a student who's fearful?" and they will say, "Just do it." Yeah, just do it. But I also would say that, and I heard this recently, did an interview with Avita Robinson of the Madness Travel Tribe. She said that put your fear in your back pocket long enough for you to get on the plane. And so I will encourage students, even if you're fearful, to just go through with it, like push past your fear, because that's the only way you're going to see your growth. You see growth, because how can you grow if you're just constantly in your comfort zone, right? Being where you're comfortable and not taking a little risk here and there. And I'm not saying like go off the deep end into the deep end of the ocean, anything like that. But I think just pushing past your fear, because I was fearful. I had never been on a plane before, but I knew at the end of that experience, I knew I would have been abroad. I would have learned some more Spanish. And you can too, like whatever your goal is, like wherever you want to go, what I would tell my students is like, close your eyes. And if money wasn't an obstacle, your family wasn't an obstacle, or, some of the main factors of students not studying abroad wasn't a factor, where would you go? And they will always come up with a destination. And so if that is where you want to go, like deep down in your gut, that's where you want to go, then go to the study abroad office, go to some resources on campus, your faculty and whatnot, and figure out how you can make that happen. A lot of times is that they will automatically just like discount themselves or discount the experience because they haven't asked those questions of how they can actually do it. So I would say push past your fear, go to the study abroad office, go to some of your peers who have studied abroad and ask those questions. Like, you don't know what you don't know. Maybe it's something that you feel you're the only one experiencing, but I'm sure the study abroad office and the advisors, even the peer advisors, have had an experience or know someone who's had an experience that could be similar to what you could go through. And just, kind of like get those stories, get those tips so that you can make that a reality.
Those are perfect tips, and those are things that we preach all the time as students. So thank you for reassuring that even more. So I looked at your website and noticed that you traveled so much so far, and probably going to travel even more, right? So I wanted to ask, how did studying abroad affect your identity, or how did your identity affect studying abroad, and how did all of those experiences kind of shape your identity and who you are today?
So when I first studied abroad, I was the only Black female student on my program, the only Black student on my program, and to be honest, the only person of color on my program. So it made me question my experience because I was with students whose families traveled before, who definitely traveled before. And so I felt alone. Like I felt like an outcast because I was the only newbie on the trip. I was so super uncomfortable with certain things, and they were super comfortable doing like traveling to other countries on the study abroad experience. Even while we were in Spain, like we had certain weekends where we had breaks. And so they would travel, some of them traveled to Ireland, some of them traveled to like the UK or England. And I didn't because I was so scared. And I think part of that was because I was Black. Like I had never had that experience before, but I was also a first generation college student. And a lot of things first gen students will go through is that they're learning as they go along. They didn't have like people before them to teach them and kind of help prepare them for these experiences. So it did definitely shape my experience at the time. But when I look back on it, it definitely, the fact that one, I had a scholarship to study abroad made me feel more appreciative of the experience. Because what I would say to anyone I would speak to is that if I didn't have the scholarship to study abroad, I wouldn't have studied abroad. Like that was just the reality, right? And then also when it came to studying abroad for the second time, I was one of 3 Black people in my program. So having 2 older, more experienced people I looked up to, it helped me feel more comfortable being a Black person in Spain, being a Black traveler, and certainly as just a Black person overall. I actually talked to my friend Tiffany not too long ago, like maybe a couple days ago. And I told her, like, you're the reason why I felt more comfortable. Like, I learned a lot from you. Because she had taught in Mexico, she had lived in Spain, she's been all over and whatnot. She had all of these life experiences, and when I looked at her, I'm like, wow, I want to be like her. And the fact that she was another Black woman in Spain like inspired me to like feel comfortable in my own skin. I'm a lighter skinned Black woman, and so when I was in Spain, obviously, people would ask me, where are you from? And I would say, Estados Unidos. But for them, they would think, oh, I would say America, and they would think, oh, Cuba or Dominican Republic. They would never think like this United States, and they would never think I was African American. So I think all of those experiences kind of shaped how I dealt with identity. And it wasn't until recently, after being in the US for some time and going through like the Black travel movement, but certainly developing as a diversity, equity and inclusion facilitator, that I kind of solidified who I was, who I am as a Black woman. Before I was just Black and then a woman. But it wasn't until recently where like those 2 identities became together, the intersectionality of them. I think over those experiences, being Black or being a person of color in a different culture in the country, helped me really kind of be comfortable who I am, because I always stood out. Like when I went to Nepal, I stood out. When I went to Ecuador, I stood out. And so it helped me become comfortable in my own skin, become comfortable in my own identity. And I would say for anyone who is, I won't even say struggling, but is questioning whether they should go to certain places because of their skin color, because of their identity, I would say it could help. Obviously, there are some countries that still prohibits LGBTQ plus identities, et cetera. But I will also say that if you're comfortable, then in the US or in other countries, it will help you be more comfortable wherever you are.
Yeah, thank you for that. Based off of what you've told us and some of your past experiences, sorry, I'm just bringing up this question I have. Can you tell us how studying abroad has changed the way you interact with others? So you've talked a lot about identity and how it shaped your identity, how you've grown. Has it changed any way that you've interacted with other people?
Certainly. So what comes to mind is privilege. So I'm American, right? And so when I go to other countries, let's say, for example, Ecuador, I volunteered abroad in Ecuador. So for me, coming from America, I had to realize like I can't treat people or judge people based off of my own standards of life and on my own perspective of life. And it's certainly not the American perspective I have. And so for me, it's basically going down to a different country, culture, and having a clean slate, like having no judgment, and it's literally allowing them to dictate how I interact. So for me, it's not using my judgment or preconceived notion or whatever, misinformation, whatever, to treat someone based off of what I've read, but based off of how they treat me. So when I volunteered in Ecuador, I volunteered with the street market children with UBESI. And so one of the things that they told us is that the children will work with their parents in the markets. And instead of asking that question or judging them like, why aren't these kids in school? I realized it's just their way of life. It's for survival, right? So I could have used the judgment I have here in the US. Obviously, if a kid doesn't go to school, then you have truancy laws, and you reach out to the parents trying to figure out what was happening, but that's not the case. I didn't want to take that with me down to another country because that's not that's not how they live. It's basic survival skills, et cetera, or just legit, just how they, put food on their table every night. And so it's definitely influenced how I interact with others because I put their culture and their way of life first before my own, because I'm a visitor, right? I'm coming to learn, I'm coming to engage in their culture, I'm coming to immerse and not to put my own judgment and my own values on another system. And that's what I learned from my first study abroad experience. Remember, I said that I thought Miami was the center of the world. And that's because I was putting my own American values and pride on the table at the forefront of another country, of another system. And I certainly compare Madrid to Miami. So again, I learned from that mistake and I realized like, Adriana, you can't do that. I talked about humility. I'm not saying that you have to bow down or submit to another culture. That's not what I'm saying. I'm like being whole, be comfortable with myself, but not also disrespecting another country. And that's certainly something I learned over time.
That was a really awesome answer. I 100% agree. This is more of a fun question just because I'm curious. If COVID was gone, everyone could travel for whatever, how long they want and could go anywhere, where would you go next? Because I've noticed that you travel to a lot of Latin American countries or a lot of Spanish countries. Where would you go next?
That's a good question because like the list is getting longer. So, the first place I would go is back to Ghana. And I've actually visited Ghana before. I want to go back to West Africa just because when I went for the first time in 2019, I just fell in love with the country. And so visiting there again will allow me more time and more space to learn more about the culture and country. So that would be the first place I would return. But if I had to pick a new place, I've always wanted to go to Bali, of course, because of Instagram. So I really, really want to go there just because it seems so serene, the nature. I love nature. And so just to relax in a villa with a little pool on the side, eating some fruits, and also the swing, that's definitely like on my the top of my bucket list.
That's really awesome and great to hear about. Those sound like really exciting places to go to.
Before we leave off, is there anything that you want to share or talk about that we haven't mentioned before?
I would say if you're looking for some travel inspiration, just the general sense of travel, I would definitely say communities on Facebook is a great place to start because you learn from other people's mistakes, stories, but also you have that built-in community. So if you're going to a destination where you don't know anyone, then you can likely hop into a Facebook group or chat, and then you can have that first friend in the country, in the city, etc. One of the great things about when I worked at Presbyterian College we had a program called International Buddies, and so we all of our international students who would come on campus, we would pair them with an American student or a domestic student, and that as we advertised it, it was like their first friend on campus. And so it's similar in the general sense, like if you go into these Facebook communities, one of which is No Madness Travel Tribe, you must have at least one passport stamp to get in, but there are plenty of others. So if you're looking for a community online to kind of dabble your toes into the travel space, definitely look them up. And if you're not on Facebook, then definitely like Instagram is a great place to find people, especially communities of color, where you get that inspiration, but you also can get know how to prepare for your experience abroad. So again, it's just finding that community so you can push past your fear and travel. And of course, you have Travelpreneur, where you can find information to prepare yourselves and to seek out that confidence so that you can see the world.
All right, that was a perfect way to wrap things up. So thank you so much, Adriana, for taking the time to speak with us and sharing your experiences. And I'm pretty sure that there are going to be students who will learn about this and realize, oh, wow, this is possible for me. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much for speaking with us. And we'll be posting this to our Instagram, and we look forward to seeing the student response to what you've had to say.
Thank you for inviting me to have this conversation, which is an important one. And I truly believe that everyone deserves to see the world because it's such a beautiful place.